この会話はみんなに聞こえてるんですか？
Okay, good morning, everyone, or good for those of you tuning in from US, good morning. For those of you tuning in from Asia, good evening. Welcome to joint seminar co-hosted by Stimson and the Canon Institute of Global Studies. Thank you for coming onto this space from the first thing to at the beginning of the day on Monday. But I'm very, very delighted to have all of you. Just to note the word of caution. One of our co-panelists, Kuni Miyake, he's obviously in high demand in Japanese media, so he's actually literally taking a taxi home from the TV program where he was appearing. He had been appearing on live, so he will join us as soon as he returned. Oh, there he is! Speaking of the devil, good morning.
I'm sorry.
I'm so happy you got home.
I have 4 URLs and I didn't know which one.
Good.
Right
But
one.
you're in.
Yes.
You're in. That's awesome. So okay, so we have everybody. So again, thank you. This actually was a very impromptu idea because when I hosted these two gentlemen for pre-election event, we had such a wonderful feedback. So we decided to go ahead and sandwich them by welcome them back to this webinar again and give us a post-election analysis. So Mr. Akita and Mr. Miyake really don't need a whole lot of introduction to the audience for today. So let me just go through quickly the some administrative procedure. So I would open this seminar by posing a couple of opening questions to the two panelists. And then after that, I will open up the floor to the question and answer. And as you might have noticed, Q&A function, you can only use Q&A function to pose speaker a question. And I can only monitor that box, and you will be able to only use that to pose question to the speakers. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome, Miyake-san and Akita-san. And then again, Miyake-san, I'm so glad you got home on time.
Yes.
It was a little bit of a typo.
Yes.
So it's been roughly a week since the Japan had the lower house election. And there were, before the election, there were some speculation that maybe LDP may suffer a number of a loss of seats, but actually turn out quite differently. So Akita-san, could you tell us how it went down?
Hi, thank you very much for having me again. And actually, on the day of the election, I was relieved to know the result, not necessarily because I was strongly supporting Kishida-san, LDP, but the result was more or less within the range of the prediction I mentioned in the last webinar. That was, I think, several days before the election. So basically, LDP ruling party lost seats, but maintained a majority with the Komet party, another ruling party maintain the overwhelming majority and claim the victory. So it was as we predicted. But to be frank, there was one notable result that I could not anticipate, and that relates to today's topic. That is the result of opposition parties. And in short, progressive opposition parties, Constitutional Democratic Party, the biggest opposition party, and also Communist Party, they lost seat. Polls said that they may gain seat, but they lost. They are the loser. They were defeated. And on the other hand, the moderate and conservative opposition parties, Japan Restoration Party and also Democratic Party for the People, they gained the seats. So they are the winner. And what was the difference between former and latter? There are several differences, but the biggest stark difference is security policy. So progressive opposition party basically have been opposing former Abe and Suga administration's security policy, that is to enhance US-Japan security alliance by introducing new security law that allow Japan to conduct collective defense right to be able to fight together with the US when necessary. So they are opposing it and they lost. But the moderate and conservative opposition parties, two parties, winners, they differ a lot in terms as regards to economic policies, welfare, social welfare policies, but they more or less support the LDP's security policy. So what does this mean for the Kishida or Japan's foreign security policy? In short, I think that this means even opposition parties' supporters want their parties to adopt a pragmatic and realistic approach. That is basically enhancing US-Japan security alliance to better deal with China or North Korea and Russia or others. So lastly, implication for Kishida administration's policy. I think obviously that this result shows the positive or following trend for Kishida administration because he himself is also poised to inherit and also accelerate Abe and Suga's approach. During LDP leadership election, Kishida committed to increase defense budget to 2% of GDP, ultimately, not at once. And also he considers for self-defense forces to acquire robust strike capability. That is a quite contentious issue, but he believes that it is necessary to further complement US military capability or deterrence capability to strengthen US-Japan alliance. So these policy will be supported not only by LDP supporters, but also conservative or moderate oppositions parties supporters. So this is, I think, this is a good and healthy trend when we look at the severe geopolitical environment surrounding Japan. And I think the result of the election shows that trend. Thank you.
Thank you, Akita-san. So Miyake-san, you just
Yes.
came off of
I just came back
talking,
from
from the TV,
Fuji.
probably talking
Fuji-
about this.
yeah, Fuji
so do you have anything
TV.
to ask? Do you have anything to add?
Yes. First of all, what Akita-san has said is basically right. So, but having said that, I think it might be premature to assume that the general public of Japan okayed the the ongoing foreign policy of Japan as it is. I think the LDP was so lucky to win. Yes, the victory is very comfortable, very stable. But having said that, I think if the COVID-19 pandemic continued to increase the number of infection, then the result could have been completely different. 2 days before the election day, the Tokyo's infection case was only 20 something or 12 something. It used to be 5,000. What if we have 3,000 on the election day? LDP could have been badly defeated. So we were so lucky, or maybe not lucky, not only lucky, but also Mr. Suga sort of delayed the election day to the month of November or October instead of June or July. If they had dissolved the parliament and the election was held in July or August, LDP could have been badly defeated. So this is something I learned today during the TV program I showed up. And but anyway, I think LDP did a great job, and what Akita-san said is relatively basically true. So in addition to that, I'd like to add something I learned today. That is the basic idea of what kind of idea Mr. Yoshimasa Hayashi, the reportedly designated foreign minister. So it means nothing, but it is probably he's going to be foreign minister in 2 days. There are some tough questions about him, saying that, okay, Mr. Hayashi, you belong to the Kochikai faction that has a tradition of pacifist, moderate, pro-China, etc. tendency. And in response to those tough questions, Mr. Hayashi seems to be more realistic, and he did not specifically state anything pro-China, or maybe he said that it's good to know about China, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it will be pro-China or something like that. So I was very comfortable talking to him, listening to him. I think the next foreign minister would be a great asset to Japan, because he speaks good English. He was in Harvard. He plays the guitar and piano, and he sings so well. So I think he's a great guy, as charming as Taro Kono is. So I think you will love him as well. But so far so good. But I'm still worried about next summer's upper house election. That is something the real sort of judgment could be done, and it doesn't. As I said, LDP won, but luckily, partly, and also they did a great job. But it doesn't mean that they can easily win the upper house election next summer, the result of which would probably define the next decade of Japanese politics. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I'm glad that you mentioned Mr. Hayashi, because that was my next question to both of you. So obviously, it has already been reported over here too that how Prime Minister Abe, starting from Prime Minister Abe, then from Mr. Suga, and then Mr. Kishida, Japan stands toward not only that Japan's stance toward PRC has becoming more and more hardened, while Japan's relationship or overreach to Taiwan is also getting closer. And Mr. Hayashi, as you pointed out, Miyake-san, do have a reputation, so to speak, to be, I guess, maybe soft on China probably is a wrong word, but then a more pro-China kind of image. So when three of us kind of talked about this before the election, both of you seem to be agreed that this more hardened stance toward China is not really driven by Japan on its own, but then also driven by the changing strategic environment and driven by external environment. So it's really not Abe's policy or Suga's policy. It's more Japan's strategic direction that is going.
That's right.
So how do you think that it all plays out? And then I would, since you, Miyake-san, mentioned Hayashi-san in the first place, so I will start with you, and then I see if Akira-san has more to add.
Well, Mr. Hayashi used the word realistic, adjective realistic, realism, so many times in the TV program, and I think that's what he has in mind. His father, and he is the president of the Parliamentarians League for Japan-China Friendship. But it doesn't mean that he is pro-China. That's something he seems to be trying to emphasize today. So, and I believe him. I don't think that no matter who becomes the foreign minister or prime minister in my country, there are three reasons that he or she cannot change the foreign policy of Japan, partly because the international environment has completely changed. And number two, there's a strong consensus being built inside Japan about more tougher foreign policy vis-a-vis China. And also the opposition parties in Japan is still divided, they are not unified in creating any new policy vis-a-vis China at this moment. So I am more comfortable with the Kishida administration and his foreign minister.
Hi, shall I? I more or less echo Miyake-san's comment, but it is boring just to echo. So if I add something, one scenario, there is another scenario, one scenario that is not necessarily so likely, but possible. That is, Hayashi-san basically tried to play as a loyal successor of Motegi, Foreign Minister Motegi, or loyal foreign minister under Kishida. But at the same time, he may try to reach out to Japan, out to Beijing, and try to establish a good mechanism of dialogue, maybe due to his liberal DNA, or maybe his, his belief that maybe Japan should both engage and deter China. And one scenario is that Beijing tried to reciprocate to Hayashi's reach out to take advantage of Kishida's kind of like a liberal instinct. In that case, maybe Japan and China, it may work, if it works positively, Japan and China's relation get tension between Beijing and Tokyo get eased a little bit. It doesn't mean that it will transform this bilateral relation to be toward a different direction, but maybe relatively stable, more stable Japan-China relation could be possible. And but I'm quite doubtful that the Xi Jinping government has a leeway to adopt moderate or softer approach to Tokyo because their domestic politics is also getting complicated toward the next year's party congress once in 5 years. That might be held in September, October next year. So it goes following to Miyake-san's analysis.
Yes, and also Mr. Kishida seems to be sending mixed signals to China. Well, while appointing Mr. Hayashi as foreign minister, he just appointed again Nakatani, the former defense minister, as prime minister's advisor for human rights affairs. Human rights affairs. Did we have human rights sort of a policy? Well, I haven't heard of. I mean, it's a new post, and Mr. Nakatani, the former foreign minister, defense minister, takes over that job. And of course, his responsibility includes maybe drafting and enacting potentially a new law to sanction foreign countries for the abuse of human rights or etc., which we never had before. So I don't know what's going to happen to the process. And there could be some opposition from the opposition parties or even inside the LDP. But I think this is part of the mixed signal that I mentioned.
Great. Yes. And I was just thinking that when you mentioned China, and because I was just reading that Mr. Nakatani was appointed for the human rights position, which was an interesting choice, I think.
Yes, it is.
And another thing that I mentioned, I thought about when you were telling us about Mr. Hayashi, how he's a good musician and everything. He was still a show at ARF foreign ministers meeting. If they resume that foreign ministers, show after the actual official meeting, I think that was like the evening. So
well, those days
he might be a rock
might have
star.
been gone, but I don't know. Yes.
But anyway, so let's get right into the question. Yes. So since we're on a topic of China, I think we're going to stay on China. And this one comes from both of your old friends, Kevin Mayer. Good morning, Kevin. Most in Japan now says there should be a strong policy toward China. But is there a clarity on what that word actually means? Who would you like to start? Well, he always is really good at putting philosophical questions.
It's the strategic ambiguity as far as Japan and the United States are concerned vis-a-vis China. You see, you cannot define clearly what we're going to do or we are not going to do. We shouldn't do that. Well, I don't know, is it a misstatement or whatever by President Biden about his commitment to defend Taiwan when attacked by China, etc. I strongly believe that Japan and the United States should, at least for a while, maintain the policy of strategic ambiguity vis-a-vis over Taiwan. And I think there are sometimes things which should not be clearly defined or stated as far as Taiwan is concerned.
Thank you. Akita-san, do you have anything to add?
I think that when I talk with Japanese government officials on the background, basically they believe that it is more effective for Japan and US to do whatever it will be necessary to improve the deterrence against China, do it very quietly. But at the same time, do it quietly and but also it is display what the US and Japan are doing to the extent that Beijing will know that.
Right.
So it is not it is in between quiet, but also very, very low profile display to China. I think Japan will pursue that kind of approach.
Yeah, in a nutshell, we should be and we are testing the limit of the deterrence policy, which we have been adopting since 1972. We're still testing it. And will it work? If it's going to work, we will keep it ambiguous. But if it's not working, then we have to find another means to deter the whatever activities from China.
So in that context, so European partners have historically been, I guess, a little bit more accommodating to China, but then that also has been shifting nowadays. So how does that affect Japan's policy coordination efforts with a European partner? Do you think make it a little easier than before as Japan continues to swim in this strategic ambiguity water? What do you think?
Well, I don't know how many European listeners or viewers today, but I think the United Kingdom is a possible partner for us in terms of TPP, in terms of Quad, in terms of possible Western Pacific alliance mechanism, which could be expanded with the expansion of the AUKUS or something like that. But continental Europeans may have some different views on China and Germany in particular. But now Germany has a new chancellor who may have a different view. The Chancellor Angela Merkel has visited China so many times without visiting Japan, but those days may be over. So it all depends on which European country we are talking about. Yes. Sorry.
Okay.
Just briefly, I think that the Japanese government and also self-defense forces expect that European deeper engagement to Indo-Pacific, especially in the military domain, is quite helpful, not because Japan and US will be able to expect European countries like France and UK and Germany will engage war when there were to be a contingency in Taiwan Strait. That is too high expectation. But the expectation is that when European country deploy more naval assets in the Pacific or more engaged politically, that will complicate China's calculation. If China have to take account of Europeans European was as another element when they prepare for some military operation or when they conduct some foreign policies, further complicating China's calculation is very important. In other words, we should not allow China to take it for granted. So in that sense, I think a European factor play important role, especially in the peacetime competition.
Thank you. Thank you for those thoughts. So in light of that, this issue had also come up when three of us were chatting about what the new national security strategy for Japan would look like. So given all this, taking into consideration the results of the election, what do you expect to see in this? If there are some key points that you think we should all be watching out for, what would those be? I guess I will start from you, Akita-san, on this.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that there are three aspects. One aspect is this is a first revision in 80 years. So first element is that it will reflect new military balance of power between US and Japan versus China. And unfortunately, it is increasingly balance of power is becoming unfavorable for US and Japan. So I think that the new security strategy will be drafted based on the premise that China is stronger and getting more stronger, especially quantitatively, military quantitatively. So that will lead to a more, that will lead to a kind of add the asymmetric element or of asymmetric element of when they, when they illustrate new military posture under the new strategy. So that is the first element. And that will lead to a second element. That is, they will make much of multi-domain, especially like space and cyber, and also maybe other like a drone, those kind of asymmetric warfare, because of the premise I mentioned in regard to the first element. And thirdly, it will emphasize for the first time that the economic security is very important. Economic security means that the economic statecraft to better compete against China, including tightening technology transfer or tightening control to foreign investment to Japan or other country, especially to a high-tech field, and also cooperate among the like-minded country to improve that, develop high technology, especially consequential technologies. So these are the three elements I expect.
Thank you. Miyake-san, any thoughts to add to what Akita-san just laid
Well,
out?
nothing to add because I know a little bit about it.
Oh, okay. I should not ask any further then. So I guess we've been on the foreign policy elements on this, so I'd like to stand up for just a little while. We spend a lot of time talking about China. But what about Korea, especially given that Mr. Hayashi supposedly will now become a foreign minister, and I would expect his attitude toward Korea is slightly different from Mr. Kishida or Mr. Suga, or even his predecessor, Mr. Motegi. So how do you see his appointment, if it does come through, will have an impact on the Japan-Korea relations?
Well, as far as I know, during the in the program I just left, Mr. Hayashi did not go into details about the Japanese position if he becomes foreign minister vis-a-vis South Korea. I think it's premature to say that. But having said that, he said that Mr. Kishida must have some obsession or some strong attachment to the agreement of 2015 over the comfortable women issue. And yes, and I told the audience that yes, the Americans were also deeply involved in the making of the agreement, to the best of my knowledge. So the question from the viewers, one of the questions of the viewers just asked whether Americans will help the Japanese in persuading South Korea, and I said, although the Americans are fully aware of the irreversibility, or whatever you call, of the agreement. I also said that the South Korea and Japan are both important allies to the United States. So probably the United States will not take side, because if they did, then that could lose the other. So I don't think that Mr. Hayashi has some specific idea about his policy vis-a-vis South Korea. But having said that, no matter who becomes the foreign minister, he or she cannot easily change the position of Japan unless the South Koreans change their mind. And we have to wait for the presidential election next March and see what's going to happen.
So Akita-san, what do you think? And then also, what have you been hearing about upcoming presidential election in Korea from your colleagues in Seoul?
So, obviously, presidential candidate of ruling party and opposition party have a quite different view about how he will handle ROK's relation with Japan. So opposition party leader candidate make much of, he says he will make much of GSOMIA, the framework by which Japan and ROK share the important military and security intelligence. And he also reportedly willing to cooperate on the security field in general with Japan, also of course with the US. So I think Kishida administration will watch very carefully. In other words, until the election, I don't see a big, move, meaningful progress or move or initiative from Tokyo side, and watch very carefully. And maybe deep in their mind, Tokyo will hope that the opposition party candidate will win because he looks like relatively more pragmatic. So that is, so after all, it is all due to depend on the result of the presidential election. That's my observation.
Thank you. And actually, this is the question that I left asking when we met last time before the election. But now that all the election results come in, where do you see the Mr. Kishida takes the Japan's relations with Russia on this one? That's the one question that I forgot to ask to both of you last time. So I'm asking you this now.
Right. This is one of the most difficult questions, I guess, to answer. I don't know. I don't know because he didn't say anything specific or anything new. What he said about his policy vis-a-vis Russia is a very conventional, orthodox sort of a policy line, which has been repeated so many times. Maybe slightly different from the Mr. Abe's policy or efforts to do something to the Japan-Russia relations. So I think all the efforts are exerted, and all the ideas and measures were taken, and nothing happened. Why? Because Russia is not ready. Russia is not strategically thinking about East Asia or Far East, Russian Far East yet, or the issue of China in general. So I don't know what Mr. Kishida might do, but personally, I would be surprised if something new would take place between Japan and Russia in the foreseeable future.
Do you agree?
I agree. And from a different angle, from different angle, if I may explain my thought. Basically, Kishida has been watching very closely about how Prime Minister Abe, how much effort he made, how much political asset he invested to Moscow to improve relation and push forward a territorial negotiation, and he failed. So I think that Prime Minister Kishida learned the lesson that how many times he will have a face-to-face meeting with Mr. Putin, it will be very, very difficult to make a progress. So if he is kind of like an intelligent, intelligent politician, I'm not so sure that he will be willing to invest his political asset too much to Russia. But at the same time, it is a nightmare scenario that Russia will be a junior partner of China and ally, officially and substantially formulate the axis with Beijing to, especially as regard to, and then put the pressure on history and territory dispute together with Beijing. So if that were to be occur, maybe Japanese government will try to adapt that trend and try to, I think, may try to slow down that axis trend again, knowing that it will be difficult, but that is the most nightmare scenario that Japanese government wants to avoid. Axis of Beijing and Russia will join together to increase the pressure on Japan on history and territorial dispute.
Thank you. So we stayed on foreign policy all this time. So let me turn to economy for a little bit. So with the Miyake-san, this goes back to what you talked about, how this election, LDP's victory was in a sense, it was lucky due to coronavirus influence has been kind of toned down a little bit when the election took place. But having said that, with the continuing effects of the pandemic on the Japanese economy, and now we're seeing more and more challenges on the global supply chain. And now with the most recent Japanese Ministry of Health and Welfare's guideline for the allowing the returning Japanese into, from overseas trip, and how even though that seems to be loosened, the quarantine period, but it really is not in practical terms. So I really have a serious question about whether, Japanese business, like overseas business, especially when it comes to the business discussion that requires in-person meetings, continues to lag. So in those environments, what do you think, either of you, is the future of Abenomics under Kishida administration? Because also, obviously, Mr. Kishida already talked about new types of capitalism that aspire both to distribute, but then also grow. So how does this all into place? And I think this could very well be affected by the trend line of the coronavirus in the future. But maybe I would start with you, Miyake-san, and while Akita-san ponders about it.
Mr. Kishida, at the beginning, when he was running for the president of the LDP, he used the expression of a new capitalism, new form of capitalism or whatever, and he put more emphasis on distribution than, well, not than, but together with, in addition to growth. The reason why he emphasized the aspect of distribution is, of course, the gap between the rich and poor is also expanding in my country as well. Therefore, we have to do something, and the pandemic has accelerated that process. So I think at the beginning, Mr. Kishida seems to be interested in addressing that aspect of economy. And but having said that, his economic policy seems to be in the process of making or formulation. And he has the best and brightest bureaucrats around him, from economic ministries, including Treasury, Minister of Finance, Ministry of Economic and METI. those people are now seems to be working on the economic policy of Japan in the years to come. So still in the process of making it, and we haven't learned anything concrete probably in the near future. Probably it will be finalized in the process of the making of budget for next fiscal year. I guess that's where we are now.
Thank you,
Nothing
Miyake-san.
concrete.
Yeah, when Nikkei examined the result of election, there is one interesting point, interesting result. If we break down into the each vote, that is the younger generation whose age is less than 40 years old supported LDP more than those who are older than like 60 or 60 years old or higher than that. That is very interesting. That will illustrate there is a struggle or battle between that generation. So younger generation supported LDP because still LDP, they believe that LDP will make much of the growth rather than just distributing wealth. Even though Kishida-san is emphasizing on distribution. But the Constitutional Democrat Party, Progressive Opposition Party basically emphasize more on distribution of wealth and strongly criticize Abenomics. And so older generation who will be relying on a pension, a welfare system, they prefer opposition party, progressive opposition parties, so they vote to that. So I think that it is interesting to see how these generation battle between younger generation who makes much of growth and older generation who makes much of distribution will play it out. And Kishida-san have to, I think we'll be watching it.
Yeah. This is a very important point. I'm 68 years old, and the generation above me are basically baby boomers or Vietnam generation, kind of. We never sent troops to Vietnam, but they are extremely anti-American and anti-Vietnam War. Those people are retiring, and they are much more liberal and anti-American, pro-communism, but the younger people are different. The younger people, younger than I am, are getting more and more to the center, back to the center, or even conservative. So I think that's really helped the LDP in this election as well. So if the younger voters turnout is higher than usual, especially.
That is an interesting change that Akita-san that you just laid out talked about as the Nikkei's and post-election analysis, because traditionally younger voters are supposed to be more of a supportive of the opposition party because they want new ideas, whereas the older generation tends to go more with the status quo establishment. So now, if I'm hearing you correctly, of Nikkei's analysis, something of a reversal is happening over here.
Well, it's not a reverse. It is very common in my country. I don't know what's happening in the United States, but yes.
So in light of that, and then one of the interesting thing, because Miyake-san mentioned about the upper house election, one of the really interesting phenomena about this election was that many senior LDP Diet member, including former Secretary General Amari, didn't win in their district.
His
so
district.
Does that, in his district. Does these kind of results surprise you? And what does that say about, I guess, direction that LDP needs to go to, which I'm sure Mr. Kishida is paying close attention to?
Akita-san, please.
I think that it is interesting that prominent, well-experienced politicians, both in a ruling party and opposition party, both of them lost equally. I mean, those politicians whose age is about around 60s or 70s. So this is not the competition between LDP or opposition party, or this is not the preference either side, but basically this shows the one common phenomena that voters wants to see the generational change a little bit more faster. But also at the same time, they don't want to those well-experienced politicians to disappear. So they voted enough vote to let them lose at their constituency, but maintain seat by proportionate district
Representatives.
yeah,
Yes.
representative. So that is a basic observation of mine.
That's kind of like insurance policy, isn't it?
Yeah,
To
yeah, that's
have
right.
those people come back based on PR.
Right. Mm.
So Miyake-san, Akita-san, thank you so much for your thoughts. We're getting into the last 5 minutes of this program already. So let me leave you with your last question, which is off the top of your head, or if you know, to the extent possible, is there anyone who would play the role of the kind of a brains for Mr. Kishida and Mr. Hayashi in the field of foreign policy? I mean, I think we are familiar with the kind of an outlook of a defense minister Kishi at this point on various issues, but I think there's still a lot we don't know about Mr. Kishi, Mr. Hayashi, to be sure, and then even Mr. Kishida. So I guess I'm not thinking about if you do happen to think about any individual's name or these universities professors, group of university professors' name or something, please feel free to share it with us. But otherwise, who do you
Akita-san
think?
knows better.
Yeah, who do you think, as it's just like a collective group, who do you think will have more influence on their thinking if individual doesn't really come to mind?
Obviously, Miyagi-san knows better, but my instinct is this. Kishida, so at first, to be honest, I cannot come up with a specific name of a potential foreign or security policy advisor to Kishida, to be honest. There will be many people who self-proclaim close advisors, but I'm not so sure that they are real. Genuinely, there will be those close advisors. But one interesting decision Kishida made that related to this question is that he promoted former Vice Minister of METI, Mr. Shimada-san. He's a bureaucrat. He's a former Jimujikan Vice Minister of METI to be his political advisor. So it's kind of equivalent to Mr. Imai and the Abe administration. I think that, so also Mr. Ryutaro Hashimoto, he also promoted Kenji Eda, then bureaucrats of METI as a political advisor. So I think that this shows that this administration is basically make much of the, will rely on or make much of the view or policy options presented from bureaucrats, whether it is good or bad, rather than relying on a specific outsider. That is my instinct. I'm not so sure that Miyake-san will agree.
Well, I cannot go into details, But one thing is for sure. Yes, Akita-san says right, but Mr. Imai, for example, or Mr. Hasegawa, Mr. Kitamura, they are all bureaucrats. You know, Kante Kando, the Prime Minister's office bureaucrats, they are former bureaucrats. So no matter who becomes Prime Minister in my country, I think unfortunately, the best and brightest has been and is going to be at least some of them from bureaucracy. That's for sure. But at the same time, some people try to promote non-bureaucrat advisors, but not always successful. Not always successful. Why? Because those outsiders do not necessarily know how the Nagatacho or Kasumigaseki works. They do not have experience, so it's probably so difficult for them to run the whole show. While the former bureaucrats or incumbent bureaucrats know much better and how to get things done. So unfortunately, or fortunately, there is some level of consistency, but at the same time, we are not America. We don't have White House and we don't have president. So I think the decision-making process is slightly different. And I'm sure that Mr. Suga and Mr. Kishida, to a more extent, they are getting back to normalcy as compared to Shinzo Abe administration. That's my hunch.
Thank you for both of your thoughts. So we are now at the 11:30 Japan time sharp, 9:30 Washington DC time sharp. So I'd like to thank both of you very much for staying awake until this late into the night. And thank you for those of you who tuned in from Japan and the rest of Asia. I do know that there's one person who did chime in from Singapore. So and probably outside Japan as well. And those of you who chime in from a DC area and the rest of the United States, thank you again. And this seminar has been recorded, so you will be able to see it in a Simpson website and Canon Institute of Global Studies website as well. So with that, thank you to everyone who joined us today. And for those of you in Japan, good night. And for those of you in the United States, have a great rest of the day. And Miyake-san, Akita-san, thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you
For watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.